that's because Nyomo Digi was on Yagiche. This other Nyomo was on that the Chigardin Madakas, Dorigan, the Carson resident in Anma. On Dorigan last Sunday, Nyomo Namne, Dajum, Simjin Jumshi, Sujum Jum, Nyamche Nebe, Mention Sona, Tishin Dumbe Me, Jeba Minion, Dine Shandu Mikum, Nesuke. Thubten Rabten Nyambe Yila Dunga Chimbo Top Che Sung Soos.
Good evening. So last week we were looking at the afflictions, looking at the actual identification of the mental afflictions, the stages by which they arise, and now we're starting at the faults of the mental afflictions. So on page 170, we start with a quotation from Maitreya's Ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. And I'll just change the second line a bit. The mental afflictions destroy you, destroy sentient beings, and destroy your ethics. Degenerated, your gain declines. Guardians and teachers revile you. There will be nasty disputes. You will take rebirth elsewhere in unfree states. And through the loss of what you have attained or had hoped to attain, there is great mental suffering.
Jevo Chungi Lamrim Bendigo, Mansung Dunga Tenete Yore Shivare, that you would drink Lamrim Bendigo, Lojam Bendigo, that Nansoma the Lada and Mida, and Denegi, Dunga Tenete Yore Sash. Chisada Dunga Kunjo Demba, and the Tishi Chevana, Dunga Shevachas, Dunga Chisoche. Chisada Dunga Digi comes on Kogi, Dunga di Yudi, Karel Tenungore, Sideta, Yukunju Demba, Sideta, Leda. Nyomo ba the leather in the Gigore, yes, and Nyomo ba the careers and the casting out the Nyomo Batanga, that Nyomo Mangu pen and that Chita Zanyu drew the Nishu said, the Niki Yungore, just that Nyomo kissing Nyomo Jumo son cherry, just a Nyomo Duces, just a Nyomo, so the leather Nyomo Belan, so the Nyomo Chadiores, just on the Gigi, quality, you lay Mosa, you're by Nayang. Also that Nyomo but in your botin Japan Shabina, and Nyomo by Kimena, New Lesa, Jibuki, also the Kitu Mares, Kovalaki 2 Mares. Cesada lady, and then on to get Yama Sasha body, Nimbo Tupshugan, Shashi, and do Shabina, Lady Mabina, Nyomo by the Yobina. Nyomo ba di le sawa sayo res nyomo le sawa soche and dineza aya masoki le sawa ngaso le ki kiwa di yungure chezade nyomo ba so res chezada de dunga sheba cha se dunga de ha ko wa che ta dunga yi gyudi geshe de dunga yo yi gyudi nga midyo ba dunga re midyo ba dunga yin sa dunga midyo ba dunga di mayo ge tablamya dunga yo yi gyudi pang ko res chezan gyu pa ya de nyomo ba de nyomo ba di res de Dusni kissing sheen and that it in a Dorigan society, Nyomo Peki Kundikima, then in the US society did here.
When we were looking at the trainings that are shared with practitioners of initial capacity, within that presentation, we looked explicitly at the sufferings that are being experienced by beings in the lower realms. Now that we are in the trainings that are shared with practitioners of intermediate capacity, we have recently completed looking at the sufferings of beings in the higher realms, namely humans and gods. This then comprises the reflections on true sufferings. Coming to a deep understanding of suffering and how it pervades our experience in cyclic existence, one gives rise to a strong wish to be free of suffering. But to be free of suffering, one has to know the origin or the cause of one's suffering. Because without abandoning the cause, a mere wish to be free of something will not lead to freedom from it. So now we've been looking at, more recently, true origins, the origins of suffering. And these are contaminated karma and afflictions. Of these, as we saw last week, the afflictions are primary. Because if one has abandoned the afflictions, whilst one will still have previously accumulated contaminated karma on one's continuum, with afflictions abandoned, that previously accumulated karma cannot ripen. It cannot cause any suffering. Moreover, with the afflictions abandoned, no further karma will be accumulated. But if, let's say, one has somehow managed to purify all of one's karma, but the afflictions haven't been abandoned, one will immediately accumulate further contaminated karma. So therefore, of these, the two origins of our suffering, the afflictions are primary, karma is secondary. Hence, Lama Tsongkhapa has first presented the afflictions. The afflictions are often presented as 6 root afflictions and 20 secondary afflictions. Here, as we looked at last week, the presentation is of those 6 root afflictions, but expanded into 10. So we looked at that last week so that one can come to know what these afflictions are. Because if we hear that these are the primary cause of our suffering, we have to be able to identify them. We then saw how they arose, and now we are starting to look in detail at the faults of the afflictions, also as to give us the strength of mind to abandon them, to have the strong self-discipline, not to come under the sway of the afflictions, to be on the lookout for them and not come under their influence.
다 세대 소설을 소설하나 지고래 제사 소설하는 게 가지고 녀모 끼어도 녀모 대샤 공로 나게 내내 녀모 버기어도 안데야 소식이 빌에 녀모 끼도 녀모 버지 왕기 라니 맞기 받아 라세 맞기 바라니 강아 수여제 강아지들 체디기 안디기네 좀 도고래서 디기 소식이 되기 매바 자르고 그래서 제사 디뇨에 매바 자기 그래서 다좀 다기 대화디마 좀 그래서 올라 안디마세 녀모바기도 녀모부 옹gel레 남바산에 디바산에 개와치마인 남수야 나손에 계제 동안용고자 개와치마는 수야 대원요에 매바 안디 원료고방 토야 될바 디기디 바좀 매바 자네 나손 마기로 그래서 다좀 세디 세디는 소식이 디기 좀 디기 매바서야 개와치마이나 디기뇨에 매바 하나 미우고 뭐 토마도 바지 나선에 개발 지고래 했었지. 근데 디뇨모비 괜디리 했어 순거래. 녀모는 다좀 사.
What's presented here is something we've touched on many times, the faults of the afflictions. Nevertheless, we need to come to recognize these with vivid clarity, so that one has a revulsion for the afflictions, seeing them as our true enemy. So looking at the first line from the ornament of Mahayana Sutras from this verse, the mental afflictions destroy you, destroy sentient beings, and destroy your ethics. So through the mere arisal of an affliction, whether it's attachment, anger, or any other affliction, immediately, through its mere arisal, we are harmed. Our good mood is lost. Any peace of mind that we had been experiencing is lost. Our mind narrows and we become agitated, afflicted. So immediately our happiness is lost. And then through the affliction, we accumulate contaminated karma that will lead to suffering in this life and lives to come. And in lives to come, it can even lead to us falling in the lower realms where we experience intense suffering. So in this way, we recognize that the mental afflictions destroy you in the sense that they destroy your happiness now, as well as later in this life, as well as in lives to come.
나 심전 좀 시대 심전 좀 신세 심전 세대 라리 신비 신 심전 시고 제사당 가지고라 소소기를 녀모 개바 있는 되자 공로 마야라서 녀모 바기리 녀모 바디 원기 신려 네버체 신려 아니 지게 네버체에 강아지야다 신디기 매버서야 아니 신기 젤라로서 구마고야라서 봐 현리야 안지게 세워지는 현 소주 발라서 봐 제리 현 좀봐 요모베 디원기 현리야 안지게 강아지야 현리야 현기 디기디기 봐 매봐서야 아니 현기 안 최소되기나야 봐서 주지 매봐 좀 두시고래 제가 요모베 균 되는지에서 심진 좀 신세 디스고래.
As we see in the first line, not only do the afflictions destroy you, they destroy sentient beings, those other than yourself. In that, the afflictions arising within your own continuum, again, whichever one it may be, attachment, anger, pride, whichever, through your mind becoming afflicted, we have an impact on others. Whether it's just through the change in our facial expression or our physical posture, the way we carry ourselves, or through the expression of an afflicted mind leading to afflicted behavior, we bring harm to others. This harm can come through things we say, saying words which cut others, hurt them deeply. It can lead to us acting physically in ways that harm others, whether it's through violence or through stealing from others. So we see in this way, through the mere arisal of afflictions within ourselves, not only does it destroy our own happiness, but it destroys the happiness of others.
수림 좀 세야 돼. 당은 랍종으로 시행바이나 당은 수림 소야 예주된 수림 소야 수림도 마시지 수림 소야 켈렘바인자 데네게다 녀몸베 집에 되셔 공로가 야로서 바기베 온게 녀몸베 온게 단 연출을 공로기네 시에 소주 발라서 바지야다. 아니 대전에 주주마와 한 시행이 잘라고 먹고와 아니 되는 제바이나 아니 미성을 줘발라서 제바이나 이제도 녀몸 온게 되는 시고래 되는 제바이나 한 소식이 수림 소야 되게 켈렘베 수림 도마디게 반냠도 거래 해서지 숨고래 수림 냠신에서 에디네 시간도 더 마시외 디domba 마시외네 당아주 미기 주봉 수림 소야게 켈링에다 랍죠마이 김바이나다 아주 미기 주봉 수림 소야 켈렘바이나 디네게 녀모기 봉 수림 측소다 마자라서 봐 안도스네 구마고야라서 봐다 디네게 녀모 온디 제어도 아나랑게 미기 주봉 수림 소야 켈렘바디게 마 수림 소야 디게 좀로 매바 차고 해서 대단가와 가루고 해서 오늘 수림 좀 써야 돼.
And thirdly, the arisal of the afflictions destroys your ethics. So it destroys one's ethics whether one is ordained or not ordained, whether one has vows or doesn't have vows. So if one has willingly taken on vows, whether the vows of the ordained or non-ordained, through the afflictions, those vows can be broken. So for the ordained, it can lead to the breaking of celibacy. For the non-ordained, it can lead to sexual misconduct. Certainly through the afflictions, the ordained or non-ordained can kill, can steal, can lie. So in these ways, through the afflictions, the vows that one has willingly embraced, these get broken, these degenerate. But beyond the vows that one has taken, the 10 non-virtues, one falls into the 10 non-virtues by means of the afflictions. The 10 non-virtues necessarily are associated with the afflictions, whether anger or of its class, attachment or of its class, or ignorance. So in this way, through harsh speech, stealing, and other forms of the 10 non-virtues, or the breaking of vows, one's ethics is destroyed.
나 냠제 예배 면신시들 다른 가르송으로서는 전 소수기 변에 데네게 추림 냠바인자 녜녜름이 랍종으로다 데네게 있는 추림도 마시바다 추림 순고래서네 아니 미야니 최고부야다 아니 지기 최고부야 유차고래서 제자다 니 냠제 예배면 시대 소수기 데네게 돈발에 뇽모게 돈만 냠소바이나 안 미샤나게 최고부야 유차고 말해서 제자데네 유마차반자 랑기 아니 지게 당한 저기 랍종 세대게 미션기 최고부에 되네게 미션을 때네 소화기 호바인자 안 되네게 최고부에 유마 자기 말해서 마차바이나 최고부에 매바이나 안 소수기 사야동야다 도로고에 세우게 되게 니야라 라야라 깔하고 차기래서 제가 니베 메시를 되네 어깔레 용거래 세티스모래 다디스 녀모 봉이 용거래서 nyomo be chebu den shungores. Means.
Then the second line, so just the first half, the part that I changed the translation, degenerated, your gain declines. So this then is specific to those who've taken the vows of the ordained. Having the vows of the ordained on one's continuum, one becomes a suitable object by which others can gain merit by making offerings and so forth. But should one's vows then degenerate which would be because of the afflictions, then one's gain declines. In other words, one no longer becomes no longer having the vows on one's continuum. One no longer is a source for others to gain merit. Therefore, one's ability to sustain oneself, so this is your gain declines, your ability to sustain yourself it declines, and therefore that impedes one's spiritual development tremendously.
다 송당 세우데 송당 세디 당 저기 달 최지에게 냠len 켈렌제 domba 송 되네게 냠len 제바이나 안에 냠len 제한절이야 근데 최근 소마디 얘기 송급는 거에서 민지단다 되네게 최 냠len 제할래 바셔야다 소수용 냠len 야고야리야 안에 송급는 거에서 이나다 되네게 소소하게 녀모베 샤워도 송하제 되네게 출연년 바로 차베나 되네 최근 소매게 송급대야 용말에서 올 송나세 송교 송화디 용말에서
The next line, degenerated, your gain declines. Guardians and teachers revile you. So guardians or protectors, these refer to those beings, those unseen beings who've promised to protect those who are engaging in the Dharma. So this would most explicitly refer to those with any vows on their continuum, but through those vows declining by means or degenerating because of their afflictions, the protectors no longer care for one in the same way, as the promise they made was to help those engaging in the Dharma, not those acting under the influence of their afflictions.
대신 된배매 세대다 내게 안다 된바 쉬이체 내다뇨 가서 녀모보게 녀모와 샤와스네 돈바디게 파냐바 있나 안에 된배야 안에 어다디 간제다 간주 시에서마쇼바나 매바시데 어다디 가서오래 아다티 야고 주마서 선비게 된데 킹 된데 콩그레스 보러다 된배매 세 된바스네 사게 다 상게 람나 리고다 네 상게 된바 상게 세 상게래.
And then this teacher should be an uppercase teacher, so referring to the Buddhas or Buddha Shakyamuni to be explicit, in that by through the risal of the afflictions, then the vows that the Buddha introduced, those and that one has willingly accepted, have declined, and that then leads. Revile is a bit of a strong word, but maybe disappointed.
난最把明年대신 현도 미hum내서 계시도最把明年시도 나最把明年시도 다 간질래 어다 수수이 도바 되네게 녀모보게 녀모보 왕게 돈바 냠바이나 어다 그 돈바요 말에 그 아니 미션다게 결혼 돈바요 말에 지산지 그 돈바요 송투요 말에 아니 지 결혼 너를 제레스 미게 되네게 두스네 안 라야다 안디마 이제 미년 바지도 어다 미디 곧 되네게 녀모 왕게 그 돈바 매바 차례 곧 두스네 안 두스네 기시유도 미테네 기시그레스다 미년 바세 되는 시골다.
The third line, there'll be nasty disputes. So through the risal of the afflictions and the degeneration or the breaking of vows, harmony is destroyed, thereby leading to nasty disputes, to aggression and to a lack of harmony.
다 내내 현도 미금네 소게 시다 제사 녀모밖에 녀모 온게 레 사제드니 겨치마 마소 미금베네 마소도 마기리스.
Through the afflictions, in particular, but not exclusively to the breaking of vows, one creates the causes that will lead to rebirth in the lower realms.
다 톱다 마소 냠비에 시되다 톱다 마소 냠비에 시되다 간중이마 다소수기 개와 유샤바디게 녀모게도 녀모 왕게 개와디게 톱아스리 냠마 개와 톱되고 유디바디게 녀모 왕게 한마 개와디게 바 냠줘야 당 안에 되네게 윤된 녀모바 가서 되네게 녀모바 개와 녀모바 냠바에서 되네 윤된 썰도 톱바라 개위 냠는 썰도 톱바라 냠바레스 진짜 냠바 톱다 마도 냠세 다다 톱 짐바 소수기로 유디바디 녀모바 개도 녀모 왕게 냠바 지고레스 안에 대 녀모가 좀 냠바지 녀모가 깨와서 몽바나 되네 개위 자와 10개 줘야 되다 사고 토야 돼 됐어야 마토고 말해 마도 와서다 토바 마도 발에 냠바시고다 토발에 냠바다 마도 발에 냠바스.
The final line, through the loss of what you had attained or had hoped to attain. So through the arisal of the afflictions and their expression leading to the degeneration of one's vows, then this has an impact in further impacts in that the virtue that one has accumulated, this declines, this is harmed. Moreover, the good qualities one has attained, now because of acting under the influence of the afflictions, these too decline. And these good qualities that you have developed, because they're declining, they are not developing. And moreover, your previously expected spiritual development, this is stopped because of the decline in one's attainment. So the qualities that one has developed, these decline, and one's hopes for further development, these cannot be fulfilled. Finally, there is great mental suffering. So through having come under the influence and acted under the influence of the afflictions, having created all this harm for oneself and through its expression for others, this leads to tremendous unhappiness. By engaging in the reflections that are being covered here, but the reflections on the faults of the afflictions, needs to lead to this clear recognition of the faults of the afflictions. And that the very purpose of our practice is to apply antidotes and thereby abandon the afflictions. This needs to be very clear to us, that the afflictions only cause harm. And in this process of causing harm, they deceive us, influence us to do what is actually against our wishes, whilst we think this will lead to happiness. We need to recognize them for what they are and apply antidotes to them diligently, continuously.
Timo sumne zo dire da zo dösha shedan timo sum dire nyomo ba chaza di sumne tine jidan zanyun ru zaiwe nyomo mo ru yin ni shu se de nyomo ba da changa de zaiwe nyomo ba de ya ru jie yore ru jie da di na ne yang zo de dösha shedan timo sum dire ane di na ne ye zo da dense mari pa sa dire da se ma dense mari pa sa de zo de mari pa sa de da se mari pa sa dire 제사다 당은 조 방에 조 디가스 다시 말이 받자와 다시 말이 번요모 받쳐서 요소게 자와디 다시 말이 발라데네 되샤라 콘로게 되샤 기에도 되샤 기에도 되는 가지하시다 아니 지게 New Semba Seada. The contracted Janlet Series Semba, the Negi Tonan, Semja Sojo Bada, the Negi Yukuma Kuala Soba, the Chazan, the Negi Yunguru, the Nizan Zawa, the Dazim Mari Badere. Tis not Dazim Mari by the Pambala, and Damia by the Tone, Topo, to combat in the Panku Warrior, Dame Topo Warrior.
As I mentioned at the start of the talk, the afflictions are usually presented as 6 root afflictions and 20 secondary afflictions. So last week we looked at the 6 roots, but expanded into 10. But however one looks at it, really it comes down to the 3 root afflictions of ignorance, attachment, and anger, or the 3 poisons of ignorance, attachment, and anger. And of these, the primary affliction is ignorance, in particular, the ignorance of self-grasping. And as we saw last week, the reason why this ignorance of self-grasping is primary is because from it follows both attachment and anger. The attachment of I want and the anger of I don't want. And from these afflictions, all the others will come, pride and so forth, as well as then acting under the influence of these afflictions. And we act in ways either physically, say, causing physical harm to others or stealing from them, or verbally, abusing others, lying to others, and so forth. So through recognizing the great faults of the afflictions, and that the primary affliction, the root cause of all the afflictions is the ignorance of self-grasping, we come to recognize I have to develop the antidote to the ignorance of self-grasping, namely the wisdom realizing selflessness.
Nga Rashin Juba Zimbatella, Gaza Dazin Siore, Nga Rashin Juba Zimbat, Dino Mongi, Zawatire, Zanda Dipangu, and Zanda to kissing children as you do, Chesan Nga said, Gudan Kingala Rang when to Yoma, Rawa Yomare, Chesan Shen you want to Shawama, the Rawa Yomare said, Chesan Nga said, Kala Yamadi Rang when you do what you Yomare said. That the Kala Mother Rang when you do. Tongba da tongba ni res dito be lo di da dito be lo de gong gu re se ji kisang chun chun na la rang yo ma re se xie de zo ro ji dim zhen da che sa da nyom mo ba zo da se ma ri ba de bang gu go re da se ma ri ba bang ba la da rang xin ju be tongba yin de do gu go ro da tongba do go re di do go ba za dang bo da rang xin ma ju ba de kan ma ju da de ka re se ne che sa rang yo ma re with
this ignorance, the ignorance of self-grasping being the root of all our afflictions is something we looked at last time. We spoke about the view of the transitory collection, and also we have been looking at in the Wednesday night series of teachings on Shantideva's engaging in the Bodhisattva's way of life, where we've spoken about the I or self as being grasped at as being self-existent, existing from its own side. So it's that grasping at the I or the self as existing from its own side that is the root of all our afflictions. And as we've been looking at in the Wednesday classes, need to come to recognize that we are under the control of others, namely the afflictions. We are not autonomous, we don't have free will, we are not independent, but are rather dependent, namely on the afflictions. So this is why we need to come to understand the wisdom realizing selflessness, and one does so through recognizing that the self is not inherently existent, or to express that differently, that the self is not independent, but dependent.
군주 뽕라자 시도 군주디 송고로 제가 당한테 디고시고 제가 군주 녀모 동아기 녀모바데 디레 균데네데 요 데네자 녀모바게 텔레테네 용고를 요바즈다 녀모바데 균데네 요바자 강아 요에게 동어요에 규차산데 녀모바데 레샤 스탄디 방고레 에세시데데데 다데는 마지바르다 준주레다 녀모베게 도시는 균디게다 도시에데레 데마 준주레스 셰당 세소 전남니 강라 가사 강라 라소 유민베 바상 민야디 지시터 대다 기타 전신제 다기 셈나 내신도 가구르다라 뇌제바 내랑 미조 쇠바니 네미 쇠바 미비니 갈랴하다 타민남 탐제 달라 전화자 대다 기야 날메비 매능 치진 주메디 녀모 뜻진 자디니 가단 채나 접경 타와 야니 밀류바 데르다 기지 지라도 다기 녀모 자오강 뒤징 토가 매바다 이네 대신 군야 디다보 유징 투바 마이노 tumba rimru tinjena tamje penna dejena nyomo namni tinjena chiji dungol nyobachi chi songbe nyema na nyemi nam sambar jaos.
We are in the section of the text looking at true origins, the origin of one's suffering. And that, we just pointed out again, is the ignorance of self-grasping. From this come all the afflictions, and from that, the accumulation of contaminated karma and our suffering, our remaining bound in these suffering realms of samsara. Hence, in particular, this ignorance of self-grasping needs to be abandoned. So this is the main topic of what we're looking at here in the Lamrim, and it's also what is presented in the Bodhisattva's way of life. So now, Lama Tsongkhapa quotes 6 verses from the chapter on conscientiousness. So I've just changed one word in the first line. Enemies such as anger and craving do not have arms, legs, and so on. They have no valor either. So why is it that they have reduced me to servitude? While abiding in my mind, they happily inflict harm on me. The patience that does not get angry at them is unsuitable, blameworthy patience. Even if the gods and demigods were all to rise as enemies against me, they could not lead or put me into the fires of the Vichi hell. The mental afflictions, those powerful foes, throw me into it in one instant, where nothing met with, not even Mount Meru is left behind, not even ashes. Compared to my foes, the mental afflictions protracted, with neither beginning nor end. Not one of all my other enemies could possibly endure so long. While everyone helps you and makes you happy, when you act harmoniously and with reverence, if you attend to mental afflictions, they inflict suffering and harm in return. Reflect on these faults stated here.
나는 셰당 세소 전남니 강라라서 유민라스 제상은주 먼저 규례 소수 규례 유대케 되차다 언니지게 컨트롤다 나게다 마리바 대서 녀모바 요레스 대서 나가줄야 녀모 자남니스 제상다 나가줄야 자세 대서 어디 디소레스 나가줄 규례 소수 규례 유대케 녀모바디게 다 자레스 랑나 자레스 그래서는 랑 디기 세델이야 소소 대부 디기 대와지 샘기버 쇼베네 콘로다 데네기 녀mom바 슈치모 게드 네 샘마기바 차다 안 대와데 좀도 오르 소소 뉴도 와스 안 디자다 데네기 녀mom바 게드 녀mom바 디기 슈치르치드 레앙 바스네 게와 치마이나야 다 데네기 나선 예 동안 용어야데 녀mom바 지기도 와스 진짜 녀mom봉원에데 나줄 네비기엔 조디다 소수규레 녀mom바데스 딩안주에 잘해스 자와 자남네 대소 이 데네기 아주 길에 이게 녀모 버다디게 녀모 제절이야 강바다 요말 라바 요말에 뇌기다 라바다 강바다 소바다 라바다 라라 천자라 소바다 되네가 요말에시래 아니 강라라서 예민라스 바상 민양사 다야직 윤된 첨부 아니 윤된 첨부 로고 첨부 현리야 즉 되네기 차상기 아니 지고 가서 구두 제어하게 되네 윤대 요바가 말해서 녀모바세디 강기 니수 강야 마신바 몽바 유지 통고만 너트차차예제 지난 바상시도 되네게 말해서 되네게 매나양 안 대다기요 다기 대다기 다 전신지 시도 제가 녀모바 대수기 원게 랑글의 예배 녀모디 원게 게디나 소소 요보나신 콘주 요보나신 파 지구이신의 소소라 랑아메바 녀모모 콘주 원도 당진의 나줄리 요보나신 두신의 지거래 에세지 지제디도 나디레다.
Looking at that first quoted verse, enemies such as anger and craving do not have arms, legs, and so on. Here, this line, first line points to a crucial recognition that enemies, those that cause us unhappiness, they do not abide outside of us, they abide within. It's not people in our lives or material circumstances that is the actual cause of all our unhappiness. The actual cause dwells within us. The cause of all our unhappiness now and later in this life and in lives to come dwells within us. And despite having no physical form, no arms and legs, they cause us all our suffering and pain. And despite not being courageous, not being clever, in fact, they are deluded, they have somehow enslaved me. This then is the meaning of the first verse.
네, 제가 당아주 녀모베 샤원도 녀모베 제 녀모베 요거래 생각도 요거가는데 녀모베래서 다 도신의 순고로와 제자한테 디네스 인자 당아주 도신 상단에 아주 녀모베 요번하신지 간에 차기도 근데 제자다 녀모아주라 라와메바 녀모베 샤원도 송아디 간에 차기 준비다 당아주 심주시하고 거라다니.
This we need to investigate. How has it come to pass that I've been enslaved by what is deluded? How has it come to pass that I have no freedom, but I am under the control of these delusions?
자, 어디니 내가 저기 지게 가르쳐비네 아주 레갈레베데 가르쳐비네 녀모버데 되네 예바 차고르바 베네가지마 지치로지 된로에네 가르치어스는 저기 당번에 누로디에 야고라고 누로디에 야고고 안지기 동어디에 주고네 주 되네시네 안지 장마를 쇠 주고르바다 주고르바실은 다디가래 세디도 삼나라 가서 나 세데 삼는 ngazi rang chi sin chi yo bare da ngazi ndigi yin chen chakwa shi go so so la o da ngai du lo ya mo ne mi an ji la go de ya bu gung bu du sa da o de ji an di wa ji dong de na go ra jan di mi an thon na go bu chi ge ma sa ma de ne gi so su ge thon chung ro de ne gi chak be ge da nga zo ngo su me na chakwa de ngan zu le gong be ong ge de ne chakwa shu len ji ji yo yo ba nga jin da nga ra shin ju ba ji me jin ba han ge di wa ge so so le 차바르지 차바르지 예베래 소소소래 차바르지 되네게 되네 두스도고로와 나 되는 말로 미지 투선에 미지기 결혼이야 나는 안줄이야 되스 식으로 지 라바네 람사 소슬레 마기바 차야디 가르쳐 버렸으네 땡할이야 녀기 할디 견주 지기도 선배 남상 라치진디기 랑을 차고기 차바디기 젠제네 다 람사 이 미대와게 셈마기와 차 셈마기에도 파절래 다 렌로에 코르게 하디 대용고로와 대내용고로와 제가 디네서 디차상당한 저기 두신에 차단기 온게데 아주 용고하다 두신에 제가당한 저기 가르치네 디레다 차단의 상황도 손실이가 요거나 자된 디네 차고로 받아
let's take something that we all do every day. Before leaving our home, we always prepare ourselves physically. We look at what we're wearing, we look at our face, and we make sure we are presentable. So this is something we do. We don't really think about it. It's beyond, this is what we do, but you don't really think about why is it that I do this. If we look very deeply, we'll see it really comes down to grasping at the self. And from grasping at the self as being self-existent follows attachment, aversion, and so forth. So in this example, that we have attachment to ourself in terms of being and express as concern for what others may think of us or say about us, about our physical appearance. So we don't need to go through some kind of intentional thought process to be concerned about how we present ourselves before others because of what they may say or think. This comes naturally to us, this innate self-grasping. But from this comes our attachment. Then we leave the home, and should one person just look at us in a way that we feel is an expression of disapproval, let alone if they say something to us, it hurts us, it cuts us. And it may dominate our mind for a long time afterwards, leading us to talk about it. This is even if someone just looked at us in a strange way without even saying anything. So this is very normal. But this is an expression of this innate self-grasping leading to attachment.
제자다 녀모바디 가와요르스 나르스 셈라 요레스 셈나르 요레스 다기 셈라 니시노 나르스 셈나르야 기디네 통코 통메바네 다리바두 신다 셈 녀모바디기 파게디나 셈 두시네 냠도 레시 녀모바시 두신 요레스 제자 다기 데다 가구르 달라 뇌제바 시드다 다 가구르 달라는 중에 가신 구비 권에서 저러다 진짜 녀모바디기게다 배를 소슬이야 다 그래서 가신 구비 권에서 내가서 샘지 미루시나 다 로봇이래 가신 구비 권 로봇이야 저러와 어디나 신지네 녀모바디게 디나가서야 누신 남사 코르기야 녀모바디기 용거에서 왔다 가신 구비 뇌체 봤을 녀모바디게 디나이 등아주 미션다기 배 로봇이래 가신 구비 권 로봇이바 나신 안직 오뎅아 로봇이로지 직제고서 녀모바기에 산 탐람 산마다나 고 공비고 녀모바 남산 끼지는 라신이가 내가지야 된 거래에서 가진 거 뇌체바스 직니데
Next verse. The next verse. Whilst abiding in my mind, they happily inflict harm on me. The first line then identifies where this enemy is to be found. So this is crucial. We need to know where to look. So readily, we know it's within. The enemy of the afflictions abides within. But you need to be very aware of how they present themselves, because, as it says in the second line, they happily inflict harm on me. This is not how they always present themselves, though. They very easily deceive us. It is their very nature to deceive us, to delude us. And they present themselves as our friends, as our protectors. But the truth is, they are always at the ready to harm us. They do so at their pleasure.
denegi na sosulia nugorte ina dela mitu sevani ngara juge delia ji pa konro malache andenu seva chebena da no mi seva chebaro chegoro wakasne nyomo bade 차단기도 나도 란시 딜레가리고로 konro chine shenlia konro geji de pasu nyembo tenje kaya samata 남사 shenli ji shengi ji cheba 남사 de soso konro tenje pa beji den goro chisa da 델리아 미토와서 되니게 뇽모게도 뇽모바들이야 마토와지 쇠바 공바 쇠바로시 공바 나신 제바나 다 쇠바니스데 다 되니게 nyomobedi anzu beji tambai na so lalen tawai na da jeju bai na dene nemin sueba mebi ne sidang ngong ne sin nyomobedi pa tong de pa nyembo den de pa jelia go res dene go ma ju ba jing anzu nyomobedi dene gi jeji beji tambai na dene nemin sueba ji ne sueba gombe ne nyomobedi sueba gombe ne mare ne mayin bejlia dene ge sueba jebai na ane di 메바리 에시데 파바남이 통해도 gyun리에시 gyun인바 통고마다 뒤연대인바 통고 말해서 메비네 세티스.
The first line identifies where these enemies are to be found, and the second line identifies their deceptive nature. And the third and fourth, the patience that does not get angry at them is unsuitable, blameworthy patience. The meaning of these two lines is that we should not allow ourselves to be deceived by the manner in which the afflictions may present themselves. They may present themselves as a protector, as a bringer of happiness, but this is their deceptive nature in full force. We need to never accept this, never accept that they are anything other than our enemies. We need to come to recognize them as harmful no matter the guise, because it's all too easy to develop an attitude, I'll abandon the afflictions. But when they present themselves as a friend, as a protector, as a bringer of happiness, then we patiently endure them because we think they are here as our friends. We need to see them for what they are and never see the patience with them as appropriate, but rather as contemptible.
Dene kalde lhada lamin na tamje dala charlanja ndida gi yanar mebe mena chijin juminis. Jezada gesi nganzulia je ji zhao se de zemle na le yebegi lhada mi tamje lhada mi da duro chasangi sosolya charlan sosugi jaje sosol nyebe kiwena sosolya kanga to se tigire ma to digi 체들이야 강한 지기리 마도 대속이 안에 마주야 냐와 나면 마 치투고 투야 말했어 대다 기게 날매비 매나 치신 주민이스 제사다 zemlina yubi mida lada dunro chasa dalaje sunga nga sosolya nyebe kibaina te tesos kanga jigiri mado digi ande kewang chima nga solma chiden nyawal ma chitu mares.
The third verse, even if the gods and demigods were all to rise as enemies against me, they could not lead or put me into the fires of the Avicii hell. So this then also points to that the afflictions are only our enemies, and they are our worst of enemies. Because if even the people with the most power over us in this life, or the most vicious of animals, or even unseen beings, gods and demigods, if all of them were to gang up on us and strive to harm us, whilst they could inflict terrible pain, that pain would only need to be endured in this one life. They cannot harm us beyond this life. The afflictions, though, can. The afflictions, though, harm us in this life and lives to come. So this verse then serves to point out just how harmful the afflictions are and why they are our true enemy.
Adene nyomo said that nyomo Thubten Rabten Ganglan Tena Repyang Tarwayani Miluba de Derda Kiji Nila Doros. Jeza Digida Nyomoba said Azu Jawa Nyomoba said Top Chemboshu, she Jawa Dini, and the Gasa Gares Chavina and Tena Repyang Tawashino. Milulas. Jezada on Zugi Dagangele, Nyomoba Shkewaina, Nyomoba Ti Wangi, Sedi Kangamase, Kewa Chimanam Suyan Digino Meba Dungal Machi Tugris, Deji on Zugi Semjen Mida, Jel Had, Sasoba Jalabina, Sedelia Kangan State to Tigre Mato, Kewa Chimangaso, Neol Machi to Echio Mar Consulate to Eomales. 다 녀몽바 자워세디 다 녀몽바 돕진 답에 맞서 돕친 자워데 돕치셔도 녀몽바들이스 제가 돕친 자워 디기 안에 강줄이야 체험바나 체대의 소수기 디기 좀 봐마세 안에 체험기가 지만 가서도 마치바치게 됐어 가다 체나 접경 타와신 밀류바시데 자 benengazugi kolo nubale jebnaje bene zemle sai zixin aneje doda xinna zixinna ne jebla so ba ji gane xibina pa xixine miaje tawana so xabana deni sube nuba yore sore ane miluba an deda kiji ji jila dor se de jeza deni kiji ji ya meba nanga midi na deni 세대 되기 여바이나 되는 요모 기지질이바 매바 마 세대 소초 소시 되는 기질이야 뭔가서 맞게바지는 예발 맞게바지는 되는 동안 용어에 마티도 지에게 누바 되는 시어레스 월다
The fourth verse. The mental afflictions, these powerful foes, throw me into it in one instant, where nothing met with, not even Mount Meru is left behind, not even ashes. So this builds on the immediately previous verse, which states that the afflictions don't only harm us in this life. All the gods, humans and animals, they can inflict immense suffering upon us, but only suffering that will be experienced in this life. The afflictions lead to our suffering both now and in lives to come. This is the outstanding feature of them, not just the intensity, but the length and duration of the suffering. It's both of these. So it's through the afflictions that we will suffer in this and lives to come. And the suffering, it refers here in this verse, refers to the suffering of the hells. So the suffering that comes from the afflictions is beyond anything that we can experience as a human, that any human being is experiencing right now, as even though many are experiencing immense suffering, the afflictions, because they can throw us to the lower realms, lead to pain and hopelessness beyond comprehension.
안젤레 당한 주기 가르 열었으네 안주 자오 세디 뭐 소야디 안젤레 네베지hen 미 샹다칠이야 안주기 자레 안주 자오레 세디 자오 소야디 데슬롱 소제 아니 데스 파 도삽려야 아주 파 네베지디 지고로 왔다 갔다 세상다 디 안주기 디 자오원에 말해서 왔다 자오원에 내가서 소수길로 유변요 못 받으레스 아주 강한 대행된 요 못 받으레스 당한주게 저지게 현다 집에나 미디게나 미다 되니까 하다 차상게 지금 순례버리 기비네 세디점이야 강아래 돼서 제투그레 마도 아니 즉 탈투나 아주 소주에 되지기레스 아니 디마도 가 아니 가요 말레스 제자다 개와치만 솔티야다 되니까 되네 티토야 가요 말레스 제자 한주게 유요 못 받들라 아니 체델이나 소소인 체델이 디기 차상 좀 아니 다들 지잡나지 메시스야데 소식이 개와 가르여베네레 아니 되게 봐좀 매봐서 안데 세대레는 기분 매봐 강아지야 안디마세 개와 치마남소야 이네야 나서는 개야다 디나게 냐얼마 긴 티진마 동아 봐도 매번 용어야디 당한주기 용모바디 지고래 자원원에도 용모바디래 시사당한저 원에도 자원이 용모메 뭔거 손에 나디 용모부 끼니 통네 단 용모부 방와를 배수시고래 세던나디 숨고라
The meaning here is to really come to recognize that our sole enemy are these afflictions. Because normally when we think about those who cause us unhappiness, we'll usually think about other people. We may even wish, oh, I was a bit different, or my circumstances, my material conditions were different. But whilst we do experience problems from a variety of sources, they pale into insignificance when compared to the afflictions. Because of that the afflictions harm us both now, throughout this life, and lives to come. So we need to recognize that the afflictions harm us in inconceivable ways over an inconceivable period of time, and they have an inconceivable strength. In other words, all that we have experienced and can experience still in this life in terms of suffering pales when compared to the suffering that the afflictions can lead us to. All the other problems that we have experienced in this life, they've come and they've gone. The others that we are experiencing, will experience, will come and go too. But the suffering from the afflictions, that suffering is particularly intense, and experienced over lifetimes and in a wide variety of means. So what this comes down to is by recognizing that the afflictions are a true enemy. Whenever we experience an unwanted circumstance of any type, look to your response to that. Look to the afflictions, because that is our real enemy.
Dani nyomo dagi nyomo drawo kang diri thoma meba tar ne deshin kunyan tetabo yunu tuba mai no se de dang anzu yuyi dang nyomo yi dagi yuyi sosu kilo yubi nyomo di nyomo bade drawo disore diso dirimbo thoma meba ne ko thoma meba ne da de bado anzu le de sha dang hongro da du skene kiechine nusin kiechine ndigi anzu ya digi meba ane gabriel ngasol ma tibar chebada dunga bado ma nyongwe chedi chesada anzu ki nyomo ba drawo digires di thoma meba ne yedi ba chires denu anzu dele nyembo de ma ba ina denu ma ba ne nyomo ba di duski dina ranyum do drochin dinegi anjige ranyum la kanga tikan di chagore seje sikta bo ni ni che da bo ni che.
The fifth verse, compared to my foes, the mental afflictions, protracted with neither beginning nor end. So just these first two lines. So I've spoken about how the afflictions cause us to suffer now, how they will cause us to suffer throughout this life and lives to come. But the truth is, they have also been causing us to suffer previously in this life and in lives previous to this. Life after life, we have been suffering because of these afflictions. And this situation that we find ourselves in will just continue until we finally manage to succeed in gaining victory over them, abandoning them, eliminating them completely.
Di nanshi yun busu kaya ma yamana mangbo sarakowa ne toma ne nga zunyum de yode ba mares sesan cetele ina anji dangbo ke ne nga zu ja jing ja je yo marwa da sesan diniki kabre chigla kapdan du kabria sosun ne ki ati yungor ma to ngedi ina ma zu le ne ki de ke diniki nyom ba na shi mares andi ma se andi ane yun bu ane jige maung ba na digi anzu cha yang jige re se nia ma le gabriel ya ko nen jige koron anzu yu kha ga cha be ne da su su ta cha ma ra ta me ba cha ge le ta ne ko maung ba ne yu bo ni ma gabriel ya ni zho go cha de yung gure ji san de ne za anzu ki le yu nyo mo ba de da ge di yin ne no thoma me ba ne da ji ba de yue de ba de no ma nyin bo de ma ba ba ne maung ba ne mu ji ji ma nga zhuo yue de ba so so nyum no ge di na nyum de yue de ba je so so le ka nga ji je ji ka nga ji go res da de nga zu ji de na zhao ji de te kap ji li ya ji ji de tu tong no ji le de so se nga zu le ne ba re chun ne ba chun ju le yi de ma do ge di na cha ra thoma me ba ne da de je de ba ya ma re maung ba ne gyun bu re yang zu da ji je je de ba de ne ma re ji san kap ji le nga zu shi zhuo ye ko ra shi zhuo lo me ba cha zhuo ra ge di na nga zu ga wa zhuo na di nga zu nyum de le chen da ji de yan che ma re yu ne tu ba ma yi no se ti sung wo re.
The third and fourth line. Not one of all my other enemies could possibly endure so long. So in this life, we've had many difficult times and unhappy situations, but these have come and they have gone. These afflictions, they have no ordinary enemy that is comparable to them. Ordinary enemies, we can befriend them. Situations may change. They may unexpectedly offer us support. But these afflictions never do. They never change. They only cause harm. They sometimes are very successful in deceiving us, thinking they're a friend, a bringer of happiness or protector. But it's always the same. They cause us pain. They cause us suffering. And moreover, all the enemies we've had or will have in this life, we have left them behind at one point. Even the final enemies we have at the end of our life, we will leave them behind when we die. The afflictions are not like that. They accompany us, often as a shadow, all too often dominant within us. This makes the afflictions stand out. They are unique. And in this way, we recognize they are our true enemies.
Tumber rimro denjena tamje pena dejena nyomo namni denjena chijin dunga nebaches jezanda disore jezan nganzu chedile nganzu nebachiken mi na dunroine des nebachen nganzu jawa sede delya tumbuche ane nganzu dushin tumbujena an delya an tamje penbarches jezanda nganzu jar an 지 tumbuchine 그러니까 가빌리 로봇차네 셈다니 보차네 안 소소소라 라진이가 펜도지겐데 차와 용그레스 장만주게 용그레스 뇽모바델라 뇽모남니 땡제나 치진 동안에 바치세데 뇽모바데 게디네 안주기 될야 지 오단 야보레 삼지 게디네 뇽모바디 바 지게 송급제데 뇽모바기 되바네 게디네 모바네 로봇차스카야 말시야 아주 강아지야 마도 치르진 동안 내버지 마음반에 동아기에 강아지야 강아지에 동아기에 개발지그리스 제산다 되는 자다 안주게 넘유네다 안다오 모마디 안주게 뇽모바디레스 뇽모바디레 내가 간주 되네 가제 야고지 파기죠 야고 상부 제베네 니 인간들의 내버 둘둘 마음반에 강아 체체야마도 소소를 판도시 용발레스 제산다 안주 넘유니지디네 안갈 내버지 미팅이 자워레서야디 당주 tumbuje 상부지는 곧 너는 그배 로봇 차지 거부 차지 펜 로봇 차지 지지래 판도 지간 차 용물에서 뇽모발에 된 자오기네 요 말이스 매번자다 뇽모발은 뒤 탐진의 균다제 파방을 마도 뇽모발로 세복구매 요 말에 뇽모발로 로봇이 가서 로봇이야 요 말 게디나데 뇽모발로 균다제 뇽모발 치중 간드시네 데 님보된제 방구를 해서 그러다는다
Final verse from Entering the Bodhisattva Way. While everyone helps you and makes you happy, while everyone helps you and makes you happy when you act harmoniously and with reverence, if you attend to mental afflictions, they inflict suffering and harm in return. Here then, there have been people in this life, also with animals, whom we don't have a good relationship with, that we would consider an enemy. But we also know from our lived experience those relationships aren't fixed, and they can improve. By acting harmoniously with others, treating them with respect, even if you don't get on with them, that relationship can change. By offering a hand of friendship, by in particular being there in a time of need. Relationships that were marked with competitiveness or with jealousy can change. So this we have experience of. We know that it can happen, and ideally we should develop harmonious relationships with all. But with these inner enemies, the more we indulge them, when we try and act in accordance with their wishes, try and be agreeable or respectful towards them, they will only harm us ever more. They will deceive us only ever more. The afflictions cannot be indulged. They cannot be treated with reverence. By doing so, only further suffering comes. They are entirely different from our normal worldly enemies. Afflictions can never be a friend. They can never be a bringer of happiness, no matter how they present themselves. And therefore, we must strive to abandon them.
다제 송베사 예미 남삼par자오 어디니기다 대시 도대견의 송외다 안디니 준주나의 송외기 Deniki Yomobe, Gyun, the Dos, and Yemi Gyun didn't do Yomo, he didn't do us and be Gyun sometimes. That the Yomo, but Mapa on the Tapminu, the Pongo, Sembe, Danganzo, Koaleke, Gyun, Benang, Halekeva, Nason Makeva, Nata, Hada, Milikeva, Nata, Unchi, Koale, Shinjela, a letter, Yomo, but Diwangi, Dusin, Kigores, just that Yomo, the Mabama and the Koale Taraguni Mindu, just I didn't that Koale Tago, Koale Matan Tabin, just that Tavala, Yomo, Bumpi, Bumba, Togo, Sebeda, Tabadunyi, or Radana, Dibu Jingi Capso, so I think Tabadunyi, Dondalia, just I didn't that Yomo with Junto, that Yomo with John, Yomo but the Bongo, the deep Bumpi, Bumba, Togo, sometimes do that. Koale Gyun, Koyu Dungadi Samta, Koyu Dungadi, Udigas and Yomobali, and Kigdos and Besamta. The name that Koyu Dungaya Junyomo, but the Bango, who simply cheated that, Duchin some diadilla, when you Bonraja said that, Deshina Suna did, and Dusung, when you Bonraja said, Decor some Tanta Dusua. Cesada the Kibu Jingi Casolam some Tadi, Cesada, Koale Kiege, Lada, Mida. And the Rogansina comes from the gay letter Yomo, Koye, you saw the Yomo by it, says a Yomo, but you can settle in a Gamatini, Sechima in a Kongasoli give at Koala Tara Michi, but the Yomo, but Resha, same big than the Yomo, Jun Honche, that the Yomo, but Bangudu, some J, some did that, Gunjo did. Kunjeti or some Dangorova, Chesada, Dineza, Yomo, but Junton, Yomo Pangudu, and Besamida, Yomo Pampi, Tele Tago, and Zada, Tele the Tigers, Yomo, but the Pangson by Na, Yomo Koale, Kiavale Tardu, Chesada, Yomo Pampi, Pampa, Tarpati, the Topu to Sempige, that Tarpatunia Gia di Dire. Chesada Tarpatunia Gia Dandala, that Yomo became somewhere the Gimzendirvada.
Lama Tsongkhapa concludes with, reflect on the fault stated here being both entering the Bodhisattva way as well as before the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. So we need to reflect on the faults of the afflictions, coming to know them well, see them very clearly, so that we come to recognize that the afflictions are always our enemies. No matter how they present themselves, they are not to be followed. We need to come to the point where we recognize there is nothing more important than abandoning the afflictions. This needs to be the priority of how I live my life, of how I follow my mind. I must no longer indulge the afflictions, no longer allow myself to be deceived by them, no longer see them as a means to bring me happiness, no longer see them as a protector from suffering. Rather, I must strive to abandon the afflictions and gain freedom from them. So we, in the text, on the section of the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, started by looking at suffering, so true sufferings. And this first noble truth, the Buddha taught, needs to be known. So there we looked at the threefold, and the eightfold, and the sixfold presentation of suffering, and then the sufferings of general sufferings of the higher realms, to come to know suffering. Here we come to know the origins of suffering, which now, coming to recognize them, we need to strive to abandon them. So here the reflection really is to come to recognize just how harmful the afflictions are, and that they are always harmful. That if they are indulged now and again, if they are followed, seen as a source of happiness or protection, that will only lead to further suffering. To come to recognize what's important is not as important. What's more important than dealing with what is around me is dealing with my response to what I encounter, and ensuring that when I encounter hardship and the afflictions arise, that I deal with that, where I deal with the afflictions. When I encounter pleasant circumstances, that I ensure I don't get deceived by the afflictions. So here the outcome needs to be to abandon the afflictions. I need to look after how I respond to what I encounter. And this is also further aided by the recognition that it's by abandoning the afflictions that we gain freedom from suffering. Or to express it differently, by abandoning the afflictions, we gain liberation from the sufferings of samsara. Because it's these afflictions that bind us into this prison, that are the walls, are the bars of this prison. It's by destroying these afflictions we gain our freedom, our liberation.
consciously yore simbe samdang de chedang ngansung ge dunga da dunga yu nyo mo ba de ki pha samda de le thar bu to samdang go ro da chedang jamle ki be ka la dine re chedang da di ga so nyo mo ba kyu de nyo mo ba de la thar bu sa samdang re dang de thaba chim bi gi chue nyam ne che bai na ane simjen tamje de ba de tem ba simje dunga da ja go samdang de simjen je dunga ja go dunga yu de nyo mo ba de le sha chedang nyo mo ba de bang go de simjen tamje nyo mo ba de le thar go do de le bang pe bang ne ne san je thar ba thok go chen be samdang de chedang thaba chim bi chue nyam ne che ba le simjen tamje ko dunga le ko ra che de that nyo mo ba de sha da nyo mo ba de bang go simjen tamje nyo mo bang go chen be samdang de chedang da zo nyo mo ba chedang ga wa ne da ngan ju ge lam nyamlen 제게 셰드다 강아지 뇽모바데 기시고 뇽모바데 다 수수규 뇽모바데 방샤바에나다 껬 함제단 자와 차르고로와 제자디 대연자디 뇽모베 껬엔디 하고와 제 뇽모바데 시고로 다 되네 장아주 이진님만 당아주 셰드다 나가서 만족이다 코에 동화되네 되네 요래서다 다 동화요에 뇽모바데인데 세세야데 하고 시에도 아주 두신 갈강삼 지고 띵서버 하고 나가서 갈강삼 하고 고로와다 되네 하고 와삼지다 야고 셔러와다 남민다 지단에다 아 지금 강아르세데 미션다게 직강아데 셴 파장냐 삼당고 남미 지단에 어디인가를 균제지가 디링가를 뉴비 디링가를 고당서 디깅 고용하려요 콘서트에도 고용하려 견지 시한에 장장을 마셔도 소수유기 삼류기 뇽모바들 삼자라 당고 말아서 지선 지산 디네자 다 소수유기 뇽모바들 삼다도 제자다 소수유기 뇽모바들 디네 연구도와 디 강아진 수도와 선비게 디네게 삼다도 뇽모바디 견지 하고 대 소수유기 냠뇨도 다 미션다이네 다 미션다기 뇽모바들 디네 콘서트 소소리 견지 제바도 소소리 녀베기와이데 직주바 삼다데 되는 아주 준주려는 민세나 송 냠내제 송고로 제자다 화다 뇽모비 샤원도 손바데 뇽모바께서는 밀라라와 요마 닝제 세베다 콜라와 코강아 시우도스 제자 뇽모보 온게 강아 요바도 소소 요바나 소소 냠뇨토데 제가 뇽모보가 기도 어다가 뇽모베 샤원도 손바데 코 sem부 기고 요마 코강아 요레 아제 닝제 세베다 콜 닝지게 제자 뇽모비 니수이데 하고 바이나 안 되니기 토네 현기 되니기 녀베기에다 되니 쇼베네 안 될이야 콘로말라와세 콜리아 닌지기에다 안 콜리아 펜비 삼다 안 그 강아세데 야 아니 오다 닌지에다 그 녀모베 강아 되니세 대공아디 강아 되니 세에 탑람 제토네 야고도 왔으면 비게 소소 닌도 비제 현기 강아세데기 내내게 냠는데 조투고네 세데 제가 되니기 니수데 녀모베 껬엔디 니수데 싱바제 녀모베 껬엔 디기 제보 동아 가르가르 용어가 하고 봐 긴기 나 되네게 냠내제 용어를 해서데 송거로 되네 자당 저기 도시네 또 남상 저기 녀모바데 베 마생도 공부 숙침부에서 남사 안에 레르고 하고 뒤에 갈래 가고래 안에 지금 남사 매바 빵 두세데 되스칼레어 이내다 공기고 뭐잖아 도시네 라트위트위시네 그래서 대대지 되네게 야야 따야 되죠 되게 리글레신
Last year, when we were looking at the training shared with practitioners of initial capacity, we came to the teachings on refuge, protecting refuge. And there we saw the cause for refuge is fear and faith. So fear and faith are the causes for seeking protecting refuge. And as one grows as a practitioner, one's refuge deepens. And refuge deepens whilst the causes remain the same, being fear and faith. But the fear, this changes, and our faith, through our growing, developing the Dharma within, our faith in the Dharma in particular, deepens. So the practitioner of initial capacity, when they go for refuge, their motivation is they turn to the three jewels for protecting refuge from the sufferings of the lower realms. And they have deep and abiding faith or trust in the three jewels that by developing the Dharma within, I will gain protection from the sufferings of the lower realms. Training now further in the training shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. When one turns to the three jewels for protecting refuge, fear arises now not solely for the suffering of the lower realms, but fear in relation to the sufferings of samsara in its entirety, whereby reflecting on true sufferings and now true origins, one wants to gain freedom from true sufferings and its causes, the afflictions, and having deep and abiding faith in the three jewels, that by cultivating the Dharma within, I will gain freedom from samsara in its entirety, we go for refuge to the three jewels. So here, the faith is still in the three jewels, and particularly in developing the Dharma within, but the fear is in relation to cyclic existence in its entirety. I do not want to remain in this prison of pain any longer. This, then, is the indispensable foundation for the refuge of the Mahayana, because there, the fear is in relation to the sufferings of samsara, but in relation to all sentient beings, not just oneself, to all sentient beings. And then the faith is again to the three jewels, that by developing the Dharma within, the Dharma of the Mahayana, I will be able to guide all beings to gain freedom from their samsara. So this is how, by engaging in these meditations, in the graduated sequence of the Lamrim, one's refuge deepens. So here we come to recognize in these trainings here that the source of our suffering is not the people that we know or have known, that we've had conflict with, or who have power over us. They're not the people in the world who have power and are causing problems. The source of our suffering is our afflictions. Therefore, how we respond to what we encounter in the world, what we encounter directly, what we encounter indirectly, how we respond determines on whether we're creating the causes for suffering or not. This needs to be taken to heart, so that where our mind is focused is not so much on the outer goings on of our life, but rather on how we are responding to it. So that, for example, whilst we are listening to and looking and thinking about what we are engaging with, we don't see as, for example, what someone says to us or what someone does towards us as of primary importance. It's important, but not to the extent that it should dominate our mind, because of what is of primary importance is our response. Initially, ensuring our response isn't afflicted. Encountering something that we like, ensure that attachment doesn't arise and deceive us. Something we dislike, that anger doesn't arise and deceive us. When we have trained well, our focus will be more on how we are responding to what we encounter rather than what is said or what is done. This means by taking care of our mind, we're taking care of our response, and we will be able to be genuinely patient. In other words, our mind will stay undisturbed in the face of any adversity because we are concerned with our mind, not with the adversity. And then when it's in relation to how others are acting or speaking towards us, not taking it so personally, because we're not getting caught up in what we assume they're thinking of us, not getting caught up in that. Our mind will be spacious and calm, and compassion for the suffering being, the afflicted being before us will arise. We will notice the difference in how we are moving through our life as opposed to how others are. And from this, compassion will arise. So to get to this point is entirely possible for all of us. It takes time, and it takes constant vigilance of one's mind, being mindful, particularly of the faults of the afflictions and the antidotes to apply. But by doing so, being vigilant, being mindful over a protracted period, what matters to you will become that my mind is not afflicted, but virtuous. And what's going on around me, what I'm encountering, is lesser to that. And in this way, our mind will start to become ever more dominated by virtue, and the afflictions will start to become a stranger.
All right, Atisha.
Okay, thank you. Then we can conclude there for tonight. Thank you.